What do we owe each other? This month, we're talking about this spiritual practice of inclusion, this radical welcoming that we try to practice with one another. And if we're successful and everybody comes in, then we ask ourselves, what do we owe each other? How should we treat one another? You know, simple questions like that. Well, the truth is you could fill the sanctuary with books that have been written on this foundational question of ethics, right? This whole section of the sanctuary would be filled with books that take a deontological approach, that say you should be nice to one another or you should share because those are inherently good things to do. They're foundationally good things. Or that you should never steal or punch one another because that's an inherently bad thing to do. When I'm teaching my children, I would say things like, it's just wrong to hog the swings on the playground. It's always right to share. We could fill this half of the sanctuary with books that take a teleological approach and say that we do things for the results that they produce. That you get a better result in life from being nice to other people, and that you get a much worse result from being mean to people. We'd say that we owe one another the behaviors that produce the right effects. So if I was teaching my kids, I would say, when you hog the swings at the playground, nobody wants to play with you. And when you share, everyone thinks you're nice. Now, these two ways of answering what do we owe each other have worked, more or less, for a long time. And they show up theologically in church traditions, in things like, God says, act this way. Or teleologically, if you don't, you'll go to hell, right? The ends and the results that come from that. And then a funny thing happened in the Enlightenment. A group of thinkers got together that looked at the question differently. They said, if I'm being honest, I want to do whatever I want. I want maximal freedom to flourish in my life, and I want to do whatever I want. But I'm also smart, and I recognize that you probably have that same thought. So if we could fast forward those thinkers to our time, it would go like this. When I'm driving, I want to get from here to there as fast as possible. I don't want to have to stop. But if we all think that way, we have a problem. So let's make a deal. Let's make a contract among us, a social contract, that if we put up stop signs, if it's my turn, I'll stop, and if it's your turn, you'll stop. We'll make it kind of a deal. And not because God will cry if I blow that stop sign, but because we live in chaos without these kinds of deals. These social contract theorists, especially Hobbes and Rousseau, spent a lot of time, I might even say too much time, wondering what life must have been like in the state of nature before we learned to make these deals with one another. And for Hobbes, that image of humanity in the state of nature was not good. It was a war of every man against every man. It was a life that was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Or, as I would explain to my children, it's like a Mad Max film. So we agree to things like stopping at stop signs because we are trying to find this balance of how to flourish in our own lives with how to get along well with one another. What do we owe one another? One thing that I want to critique the social contract theorists about is they tend to think about it as an individual, as just one actor in the world, right? But we live in these complex webs of being. And that brings us to cows. Or the problem of how to feed the cows. If we could bring the Enlightenment thinkers forward to cars, we can bring us back 200 years to the Wisconsin Territory. We're still in this church, but outside is prairie and fields. And all of us have cows, of course. Where else would we get our milk and cheese? Every one of us has cows. You have cows, you have cows. And we've dedicated, let's say, 20 acres to public grazing land. And it's enough where if we're careful about it, We can all graze our cows, but if we all graze at once, it's not enough land. So we all make, let's call it a social contract. Let's be cool about it and not overgraze this land. And we all say yes. But Dale, can I pick on you for a second? Let's assume that Dale is an early riser. So Dale gets up at 5 in the morning, is that right? Okay, I had a hunch. So Dale gets up at 5 with Dale's cows, and Dale's gonna follow the deal. He's not gonna overgraze. But he's up at 5 with the cows, and that wakes up, let's say, Jeannie. And Jeannie goes, oh no, Dale's already got to jump on the grazing, so Jeannie takes Jeannie's cows out. And that wakes up Desiree, and Desiree's going, I wasn't even going to graze today, but I'm noticing that everybody else is grazing their cows, so I'll take mine out. And it goes on and on like this, and by the time the band wakes up at noon, there's no grass left. There was a run on the grazing land. Sorry. This is a thought experiment known as the tragedy of the commons. In this thought experiment, there's a publicly shared resource that we all use, right? Grazing land for us all as farmers, or let's say the Colorado River for Western states, toilet paper in your grocery store. And there should be enough for everyone, but there's always a selfish incentive to overconsume. It doesn't hurt you to graze a little extra. In fact, it helps your cows. It doesn't hurt you to buy 64 rolls of toilet paper, right? And it doesn't hurt you to make your Arizona golf course green and lush. But there is a huge disincentive if we all do that. We could have a sustainable amount if we each restricted ourselves, but nothing's actually stopping any one individual actor. So we start to overconsume, and behold, the river becomes a riverbed. There's no toilet paper in the grocery store. You remember that example, right? And the grass is all gone. It's a tragedy. What do we owe each other? Shortly after the November 2024 elections, I saw a quote over and over on my social media feed. It was a quote about the paradox of tolerance. And it comes from the philosopher Karl Popper. And the quote goes like this: unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. Oof. If I had to explain that to my children, everybody gets a right to play on the playground, but if we extend that right without any rules, then eventually someone will bully others and take over the playground. Now, I'm not saying a bully, because I believe that everybody has inherent worth and dignity, but I'm saying someone who bullies. Now, that is a troubling thought. We want to be open and welcoming and loving and trusting, and to the point in February, radically inclusive. But Popper was saying, someone will definitely come to your playground and say, I want the slides to myself, and start punching people who go by the slides. Then he'll enlist other people to protect the slides for him, and then he'll say, now I want the swings. And he'll start punching anybody who goes near the swings. Now, we're radically loving and inclusive, and so we're gonna get dismayed, we're gonna form a committee, we're gonna meet, and we're gonna say, look, we are the welcoming, loving people on this playground. Maybe what he really needed was the swings. But of course, a person who is bullying doesn't stop bullying. They keep taking over one section after another. Czechoslovakia, Greenland, until suddenly you're either with the person bullying the playground or you're kicked out of the playground. It's important to remember that Karl Popper was a psychologist who was raised in a Jewish family in Austria in the early 1900s. He saw his nation given over to a bully in the 1930s before he emigrated. Popper's writing was not a thought experiment. It was data. What do we owe each other? It's a complicated question. Popper warns us, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. There's an answer. We owe it to one another to defend a free and pluralistic society from any attack of intolerance. If we want to have that grazing land so that we can have our milk and butter and cheese, we actually need to regulate our common land usage. If we want the Colorado River to remain a river, we need to regulate water among Western states. Now, there is a key point, and thank you to the men's group for teaching me this. Nobel Prize-winning scholar Elinor Ostrom critiqued the idea that the common resource always gets exploited. She writes, and I'm quoting her, "What we have ignored is what citizens can do in the importance of real involvement of the people involved." Quite so, Dr. Ostrom, quite so. What if we were actually involved as a community in the health and the safety of the grazing land and the playground? What do we owe one another? Covenants. Clear, public, enforceable covenants. Covenants that everybody understands, covenants that we are, all of us, held accountable to. And a covenant is not the same thing as a law. There's a law that you don't tear the tag off that thing on your mattress. It's a deontological law. It doesn't come back to benefit you in any way. It's just wrong to tear it off. But a covenant is relational. It's two-way. There's what you promise to do or not do, but there's also what you get from it. So when God says to Abraham, I need you to leave this place and go to this place, God also promises Abraham 1 million descendants. Marriage is a kind of covenant that says there's some things you can do and some things you can't do, but it also says we'll be here for one another in love. Covenants hold us to accountable relationship. I might break the covenant, I might overgraze my cows one day, but then I know that I'll be held to account by all of us for this breach, and I will be asked to repair it. Our congregation has a covenant. Last week, right here, 14 members joined our congregation, and they expressed that by reading our covenant. It's on the back of your order of service. Can you find it now? It's on the last page. It may have been a minute since you joined, but it's good to remember that we are all held in this covenant. Can we read it together? Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And I want to point out two things about what it means to have a congregational covenant. One, it means there's a boundary, and two, there's something inside that. So let's talk about the boundary first. Many of us, including me, found Unitarian Universalism. We came from a different spiritual path. And mine, for example, had a lot of rules. So you find your way to Unitarian Universalism, and for many of us, you feel that fresh air and the open blue skies of a non-creedal pluralistic tradition, and you get so excited that you might even say, I can believe anything here. Anything? Not anything. You can believe anything that fits within the covenant. You cannot be violent or abusive or bullying. You cannot walk around saying, behold my religious freedom. Here I can just slap everyone I meet at coffee hour. That's not dwelling together in peace. That's not seeking the truth in love. And it's not helping one another. And I use this goofy example to say a hard truth. You congregations sometimes struggle with covenant. Sometimes UU congregations become so enamored of their openness, our radical welcome and inclusion, that they forget the paradox of tolerance. They forget the tragedy of the commons. They forget why we have stop signs and water regulation. And it breaks my heart as someone in search to read about congregations who have been run over by a few people who are bullying. A congregation can spend years at the side of the playground, just kicking the dirt, hoping maybe one day in the future they can get a turn at the swings again. There are reasons for those limits, and at the same time, we know that within that, a church can be a place of refuge and safety and love and comfort and courage. I feel that in this space. What we do here is beautiful and meaningful, but the community can't create that place of radical welcome if it's boundaryless. That's the paradox. An explicitly named, publicly shared covenant, lovingly and consistently held, creates the conditions for a church that practices radical love. And so, beloveds, as you go through this next week or next 4 years or however you want to manage your future, notice this paradox of tolerance. Sit with your feelings when you see someone acting in a bullying way to take over the metaphorical swings or drive through those metaphorical stop signs. Then take a breath and remember that you're a Unitarian Universalist. There are among our spiritual ancestors those who saw intolerance, those who saw enslavement and said no and became abolitionists, those who said not today and became suffragists, some who said absolutely not and became gay rights activists, Black Lives Matter activists, trans rights supporters. We have what we need in here already. You all have sung the truth of it. I won't give up on us. What are we even fighting for? It's not always easy, and sometimes life can be deceiving, but I'll tell you one thing, it's always better when we're together. The poet, and I would say prophet, Amanda Gorman writes, "To anyone out there, I only ask that you care before it's too late, that you live aware and awake, that you lead with love in hours of hate. I challenge you to heed this call. I dare you to shape our fate. Above all, I dare you to do good so that the world might be great." May that be so.